Welcome back to Good Chair Discussions, a college chaplain's view from the foot of an ivory tower. For today, we've got another solo reflection where I've been spending a lot of what is the downtime during coronavirus, reflecting on some different aspects of the way that Christian ethics are being played out during the time of coronavirus. And so here are some thoughts related to that, but I'm hoping that this will just be part one of a series to continue on into several discussions. So I hope you enjoy and shout out some thoughts to us. So I don't know if you've ever seen the Mummy movies. Some of the earlier ones, there was like this whole franchise. I can't even keep up. I don't even know how many there are, but there's this character, and it's in the first Mummy movie, I think, a character named Benny. And Benny is that quintessential character that is completely self-serving the whole time. Like, doesn't matter what side he's on, doesn't matter, like he'll play both sides. There's no loyalties. Benny is just out for Benny. And he's the comedic relief, and it's perfect. It plays it to a T. But I don't know if you see this, because this actually happens a lot. Movies really capture this when you've got those one or two characters that they just don't seem to care about this big, massive thing that's happening all around them. Like this huge sort of end of the world apocalyptic thing, just so long as they take care of themselves. And I think movies portray this well. Benny's just one example, but if you get a chance to go back and watch the movies, you'll know what I'm talking about. But I'm sure you can imagine the kind of person that is portrayed in these caricatures of someone who just seems obtuse to all this, but is really focused on themselves. And I've been reflecting on some stuff in light of COVID-19. We're still here. It's May. As you can see, I haven't gotten a haircut in a while, and it's just running wild and free now, as all wild things should. And we're still here, and we're still pondering these things, and the whole thing has gotten very political. There's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of blame shifting, and at the end of the day, not a lot of unity, not a lot of progression forward, not a lot going on that instills confidence in the fact that this is something that we're working together to rectify. And I was listening to a podcast today. The Intersections podcast had on Dr. Emily McGowan, who is a professor at Wheaton, and they were talking about theodicy, and they were talking about the way we understand God in light of suffering in the world. And one of the first things they brought up was this concept of natural evil. And the way we think about natural evil is we think about it in terms of things like the coronavirus, things in the natural world that happen, tsunamis and earthquakes. And they were talking about like a snake, and the fact that the snake has venom makes you think that the snake is bad. And so really just parsing these ideas of how we understand evil in the natural world. And I've always thought this to be, ever since I learned about natural evil, I thought, well, these things don't seem to be evil in and of themselves. And this is something Dr. McGowan brought up. These things are not evil in and of themselves. They're actually only evil in the sense of how they affect humanity. So our understanding of them as evils is very anthropocentric. It's very much connected to how they affect us. Like if an earthquake happens, you know, in the middle of the ocean somewhere, or a raging storm that affects no one, then big deal, right? This doesn't appear to be evil in and of itself. And so when we look at the coronavirus, what we see is something that we're somewhat familiar with, in the sense that we're not strangers to illness. We're not strangers to death. We know there's mortality for all of us, and we've always been a culture that laments when sickness or illness takes people, especially in an untimely way. I think about just the fact that I don't think I know anybody now whose lives are not touched by someone who's had cancer. Cancer has been just one of those things that we've grown to live with and understand and work with, and our medical community keeps making advances on. So this coronavirus is not brand new in the sense that it categorically falls into something that we've understood, but in and of itself, it has this whole other aspect because it A, is so contagious, and B, just has this weird spectrum where it can barely affect some people and ravish others. I recall a story I heard lately of someone who had survived the coronavirus, and it attacked every organ in their body, and they're still, even though they've survived the virus, they're struggling to walk and they have brain damage as a result. It's just a really horrific disease, and something that we have to deal with, something that we can't just ignore how this disease is affecting those, particularly who have suffered significantly with contracting the disease. But I get the feeling that coming out of this time, we are probably going to wrestle more. So we're probably going to wrestle less with the evils that come from the natural world. I think we're going to end up wrestling more with the evils that we've done to each other. And going back to the caricature from the movies, I feel like right now, especially with states reopening, with us dealing with the balance of both the health risks and the economic risks, we find ourselves in a place where we are unsure what is good and what is right. And in many cases, we're still, what we're seeing is people picketing with signs that say, "I want a haircut." For my friend who's suffering from brain damage, it's just an interesting dichotomy to think about what this virus is doing and has done to people, and the things that we demand in the wake of being inconvenienced. But for some of us, it's not even an inconvenience. For some people, there are real economic problems. We've known friends that have lost jobs. We know businesses that are closing for permanently, people that are really struggling. And I think that as Christians, one of the biggest things that we're going to have to wrestle with in all of this is how do we proceed in loving our neighbor when there is both the health and the economic vulnerabilities that are at stake. And I read something recently, somebody said something to the effect of, we're saying, how can we support those who have to return to their jobs in order to pay their bills, even in the midst of risk. But what we're not asking is, how can we allow those people to not have to be at risk and still pay their bills? So in some ways, we want people to be able to economically survive this, but we also kind of want to get our nails done. So I had a picture that posted on one of my social medias that the cover photo was really what was striking to me, more so than the article itself. And it's a picture of a salon worker, Asian American, not just wearing a mask, but is literally covered head to toe in protective, it's almost like a tarp, like a poncho or something that you would wear in the rain. And you see the hands of a white person over the side, and they're doing their nails. And that picture struck me. It struck me because it shows fear. I think it must be a horrible choice. It must be a horrible choice for people to make, particularly in jobs where there's already vulnerability, for someone to have to say, I have to feed my family, I have to pay my bills, And in order to do that, I have to put myself at risk. And we're talking about people who already probably have the worst end of the healthcare system, the least economic advantages when it comes to being able to take care of themselves, and are likely living with vulnerable communities in their homes. So they're choosing to go to work knowing that they also are having to endure all these risks. I mean, you're not going to be in a nail salon wearing like masks and basically covered head to toe in plastic if you are not terrified of contracting something. But what other choice do they have? And it's important to raise this, I think, because this provides us an opportunity to see something that is not actually different from the way things were before. The coronavirus has very much thrown a microscope on the injustices and the inequities within our own systems. A friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Coleman Fannin, who teaches here at Berry, wrote a blog for our office that I thought was so poignant about this, and just a short reflection about saying, hey, the world hasn't changed, but we must change how we inhabit the world. And just to read this passage here, he says, the events of the last 2 months have caused many of us to reflect on matters that we too often ignore, including the limits of technology, our need for community, and above all, our mortality. No matter how healthy or wealthy we may be, we are not long for this world. Such reflection is all to the good, provided that it causes us to act. As Christians, we shouldn't worry about anything because God will give us a peace that surpasses our understanding. Philippians 4:6-7. And because our hope is not in physical health or financial security, but in Christ. 1 Timothy 4:10. This hope should free us to develop different habits and priorities, ones more attuned to the needs of our neighbors and our planet. And I think it's time to open our eyes to this. I think he says this so well, and it really resonated with me because it's what I felt in my own heart. The fact that the dissipation of the smog in the cities, the dolphins in the canals, the wildlife flourishing again. I get a chance to get out into nature quite often because of where I live. And just the fact that nature is thriving and environments are healing as a result of this points to the fact that our our continued engagement with the natural world causes damage. What are we going to do about that as we slowly get back to normal? Do we go back to those same sort of damaging levels of engagement, or do we change? And then in the same sense, our economy and our systems, the same people who are struggling now have always been struggling. Like the fact that we see people on the streets demanding certain creature comforts, damn the risks, is not something new. We have always sacrificed the weaker and more vulnerable in our economy in order to have the things that we might be able to, as the more advantaged people, be able to afford to procure, knowing or refusing maybe to know what it's actually doing to others. So now it's becoming really stark because now they're really exposing themselves to danger. They're really exposing themselves to these terrible choices of either bankruptcy and starvation or illness and potentially death, or just terrible side effects resulting from it, access to healthcare. But these people were always vulnerable. This isn't new. This is just now exposing it because it's magnified. The coronavirus has magnified that vulnerability. And so as Christians, what do we do about that? How do we stand in the gap of that? And this is a conversation I want to keep having because I see this as an opportunity, a historic opportunity for us to rethink the way the systems that are all around us here in America are working against the shalom of God, against justice, against the heartbeat of God for the most vulnerable, and the ways that we can leverage our advantage, the way we can leverage our privilege in light of Philippians 2, the way that Christ leveraged his power for the least of these, for the most vulnerable, humbling himself. This is a real opportunity for us to take time to expose these things, discuss these things. So let's talk some more about this. I want to hear from you. I want to hear your thoughts, your opinions. These are complicated things. It's not super cut and dry. There's a lot to discuss here. So let's do this together. Well, there you have it. We don't want to be the character Benny from The Mummy. We don't want to be those that are marking our faith and our history by only thinking about ourselves during this crisis. This is a real opportunity, and though things are complex, I think this is a discussion worth having. So let's keep going with it. And I just want to say thank you again for joining us today. I say us, it's really just me right now, but thanks for stopping by anyways for another one of the Good Share discussions. Glad that you took a seat with us and joined in today. And we just want to say we go out now to love God and neighbor, and we'll catch you next time.